He was just trying to get his daughter home before the rain turned worse. But when he spotted her, alone in soaked lace, makeup running, bouquet crumpled, he didn't ask questions, just handed her the umbrella and walked on. What he didn't know, she owned the venue, the vineyard, and maybe, just maybe, the road back to his heart. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The sky had that color to it, gunmetal gray with a thread of green in the horizon, the kind of sky that didn't wait for permission before letting go. The air was thick, like it was holding its breath, and every dog in town was already pacing by back doors. He pulled the truck up the winding gravel road, tires crunching with slow resistance. The vineyard came into view at the crest, rows of green stretched like careful lines drawn by steadier hands. White balloons flapped lazily on a wooden sign. Happy Birthday, Sophie. Someone had scrawled it in purple marker with too many hearts. Eli cut the engine and sat for a second, hands resting on the steering wheel. He blinked hard and rubbed his thumb over the small grease smudge on his jeans. He'd meant to change. The invitation had said semi-casual, but what did that even mean for a man who lived in coveralls and steel-toe boots? The back door of the house opened. A blur of pink tulle and high-pitched squeals spilled onto the porch as a group of little girls bolted into the yard, faces sticky with cake and rainless wind. Then there she was, his daughter Addie, sprinting toward the truck with shoes in her hand and frosting on her chin. "Dad," she yelled, "you're late. We were about to start the treasure hunt without you." He opened the door, stepped out. "Told you I'd be here before the rain." She looked up, squinting at the sky. "It's not raining yet." "Exactly." She grinned and threw her arms around him, her messy curls pressed into his chest. He held her tight for a second longer than necessary. There were days he didn't feel like he was doing enough, most days, really. But when she looked at him like that, unbothered by the world, safe just because he showed up, it quieted everything else. "You say thank you to the host?" he asked, glancing toward the house. She pointed. She wasn't there, just a lady in charge of decorations, said the owners away. Eli nodded, but something about that struck him odd. A place this polished, this put together, and no one to show face. He grabbed her shoes, took her hand, and they walked back toward the truck. Behind them, the clouds rolled in fast, and somewhere farther down the vineyard path, a woman in a wedding dress stood still in the rows, soaked, silent, and unseen. He saw her as he turned the truck around, slow on the bend where the vineyard path met the old service road, where the grape rows thinned and the trees broke just enough to let in the wind. At first he thought she was a scarecrow or a statue, something left over from the event. But then she moved, barefoot, soaked to the skin, a ruined bouquet limp in one hand. Her dress clung to her like it had given up trying to keep her warm. Lace that had once probably cost more than his truck was now torn near the hem, stained with mud and pinched under her knees like she'd been sitting on the ground too long. Her hair hung down her back in heavy, wet strands, stuck to her face like ivy. She wasn't crying, not exactly, but she looked hollow, like whatever had happened had drained the part of her meant for expression. Eli pressed the brake, foot hovering over it longer than he should have. His daughter Addie was in the back seat, quietly watching something on her tablet with headphones in. He glanced at her, safe, dry, unaware, and then back to the woman in the road. He rolled the window down a few inches. "You all right?" he called, voice raised just enough to cut through the rain that had started spitting. The woman turned her head slowly. Her eyes found his, but it took a second, like she was pulling herself back into her body. She blinked, nodded, then looked away, like she couldn't afford the answer she wanted to give. He reached behind the seat, grabbed the umbrella he kept for Addie's soccer games, and stepped out. The rain hit instantly, cold and sharp, running down the back of his neck. She didn't speak as he approached, and he didn't ask again. He just handed her the umbrella. She took it without meeting his eyes, hands trembling, bouquet still in one. She opened it slowly and held it over her head like she wasn't sure she deserved it. Then, just like that, she turned and walked back toward the house, barefoot in the gravel, veil dragging behind her like a secret too heavy to carry. Eli stood there a moment longer, wet to the bone, watching the path she left behind. Some things you fix, some things you just witness. The umbrella was cheap, the kind handed out at fundraisers or tucked into glove boxes and forgotten until skies turned. Its handle was chipped, and one spoke was bent just enough to make it lopsided, but it still opened with a determined snap. Eli didn't think much about it. He just grabbed it, stepped into the rain, and crossed the path between them. The gravel shifted under his boots as he approached her. She hadn't moved since he first saw her, still standing there with her bouquet like she wasn't ready to admit the day was over. Her dress clung to her skin, soaked and sagging. The delicate buttons down the back tugged half loose. She looked like someone who'd braced herself for the fall and was surprised to still be standing. He stopped just short of her. Not too close, not far. Close enough that the silence didn't feel accidental. She glanced at him then, finally meeting his eyes. Her expression didn't ask for anything, not pity, not help. Just a flicker of acknowledgement, like she saw him, like she knew he wasn't just another bystander pretending not to notice. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Slowly he held out the umbrella. She stared at it for a moment, as if trying to decide whether taking it would make things worse or better. Then, without a word, she reached out with her free hand and took it from him. Their fingers didn't touch. But for the breath of a second, they stood there beneath the same falling sky, bound by nothing except the shared absurdity of this moment. A mechanic in worn boots and a bride without a wedding. No thank you came, no name, just a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned. The umbrella opened above her with a soft pop, lopsided but holding. She walked back up the gravel path, bouquet lowered, lace dragging, the fabric of her dress catching on stones as she went. Eli stood there, rain soaking into the collar of his shirt, unsure whether he'd just stepped into someone's ending or the beginning of something that hadn't found its name yet. Eli walked back to the truck slower than he meant to, each step damp and deliberate, his shirt clinging to his back. The rain had shifted, less of a downpour now, more of a steady whisper that filled every quiet space. He glanced through the windshield and saw Addie still curled up in the back seat, earbuds in, humming along to whatever song she'd latched onto this week. He opened the door, slid in behind the wheel, and took a long breath before starting the engine. But something made him look back. Just one more glance toward the path where she'd stood. She was gone. He blinked, leaned forward, craning his neck toward the hill that curved around the main house. The umbrella was gone too. No figure in white, no slumped shoulders, no sign of the woman who'd been standing there moments ago like her world had just cracked in half. Just gravel, wet and glittering with rain, and the faint outline of a tire track where a car had recently pulled out. He spotted it then, taillights disappearing up the ridge, swallowed by mist. A sleek black car, not the kind from around here, not mud-worn or farm-used, something expensive, silent. And just like that, she was nowhere. He stepped out of the truck again, scanning the rows of grapevines, the porch of the big house, the side drive near the guest quarters. But there was nothing. No lingering movement, no flash of fabric in the trees. Just a few crushed petals in the dirt where she'd dropped her bouquet. Pale pink against brown earth, soaked through. He crouched down, picked one up. It fell apart between his fingers. Addie tapped on the window from inside the truck. "Dad," she called, "we're gonna be late." He stood brushing rain from his face and nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We're going." But the image of her lingered, her soaked dress, the way she'd taken the umbrella without a word, and the way she disappeared like a breath held too long and then suddenly gone. He had the strange, sharp sense that whatever storm she'd walked through wasn't over yet. By Monday morning, the rain had dried, but the questions hadn't. The town's only cafe, Luann's, right off Main, was packed tighter than usual for that early hour. Eli stood at the counter, waiting on a black coffee to go while the booth crowd buzzed just behind him, all quiet voices and sideways glances. It didn't take much for this town to find a story, but this one, they'd sunk their teeth in like it owed them something. "I heard she bolted just before the vows," said a woman in a denim jacket, too clean for farm work. No, someone else cut in. "He left her, got cold feet, and walked, mid-ceremony. Can you believe that?" Eli turned just slightly, enough to see the whole booth leaned in over their mugs like conspiracy theorists around a campfire. None of them had been there, not really, not close enough to say for sure. But facts never mattered much in a town like this, just tone and timing. Luann slid his coffee across the counter without a word. Her eyes lingered on him a beat too long, like she knew he knew something. He gave a nod, tried not to let it stick. "Word is she owns the place," someone said, in a half-whisper, half-dare. "Bought the vineyard last year. Quiet sale, all cash. Just showed up one day with an out-of-state license plate and a lot of opinions." "She didn't even have any family there," said another. "That should have told us something." Eli's grip tightened on the paper cup, the heat seeping into his hand. He didn't turn back toward them, didn't correct a single thing. He thought about the woman in the rain, barefoot, silent, shaking, and how none of these people had seen her like that, not vulnerable, not undone. As he pushed the door open, the bell overhead chimed its thin little song. The morning air hit him clean, but the noise followed. Even in their softest tones, people here could be brutal with what they didn't understand. He took a sip of the coffee, bitter and overbrewed, and kept walking. Some stories needed time to speak for themselves. Others just needed someone to stop talking long enough to listen. He was elbow-deep in a rusted brake line when his sister showed up at the garage, the screen door slapping behind her like it always did, no matter how slow she tried to close it. She stood just inside, arms crossed, keys dangling from one hand, watching him the way older sisters do, like they're always a little ahead, even when you know they aren't. "You hear the latest?" she asked. Eli didn't look up from the truck. "If it's from Luann's, I've heard enough." "It's not rumor, it's record." That made him pause. He stood, wiped his hands on a rag already stained from the week before, and looked at her. "Go on then," he said, like he wasn't curious, like he hadn't been thinking about the woman in the rain every single night since. "The bride?" she said. "She's not just someone who rented the place. She owns it, lock, stock, and vineyard." He blinked. "The whole estate?" "Bought it last fall, under a holding name, but the paperwork's local now. Just switched it over last month. She's been fixing it up in phases. Quiet rebrand. Not just a wedding venue. She's turning it into a full-on luxury retreat. Events, private rentals, weekend getaways." Eli exhaled slowly. "That why no one's seen her around town?" His sister nodded. "She's not hiding. She's working. Replanting vines, hiring staff. That whole setup up there, she's building something." He leaned back against the hood of the truck, the metal cool through his shirt. The woman's soaked silhouette flashed back in his mind, the weight in her eyes, the torn lace, the way she'd held that ruined bouquet like it was the only thing anchoring her. "She didn't seem like someone building anything," he said quietly. His sister softened then, stepped closer. "Maybe she was just trying to survive the moment. Doesn't mean she's not still fighting for something bigger." He looked at her, nodded once. The rain hadn't touched the vineyard since that night. But something had changed. The way stories changed when the truth started to crawl out from underneath. He didn't say it aloud, but part of him already knew. People who bought vineyards alone didn't run from weddings because they were weak. They ran because they still had something left worth protecting. It was 3 days after the rain, and the air had gone dry and sharp, the kind of weather that hinted fall was closer than it looked. Eli had just finished fixing the loose gate hinge out back, one of those chores that didn't matter to anyone, but still gnawed at him if left undone. As he rounded the porch steps, something caught his eye by the door, leaning against the siding almost like it had walked itself there. The umbrella, same cheap frame, still lopsided, though someone had wiped it clean. The fabric was neatly folded, the handle set just so, not dropped or forgotten, placed, deliberate. He stared at it for a long moment before bending down to pick it up. As he did, something slipped from inside, tucked beneath the band that held it closed. A note, small, folded once. He hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was careful, graceful even, but unsteady in parts like the pen had paused more than once mid-thought. Thank you for seeing me when I wasn't sure I existed anymore. The world feels heavier in lace. I'm sorry I didn't say more. V.H., no name. Just those 2 letters tucked like a secret at the bottom. Eli read it twice, then once more, slower. He tried to picture her writing it, where she'd sat, what expression she'd worn. Had her hand shaken? Had she cried? Or had she written it quickly, afraid that too much time might stop her from saying anything at all? He folded the note again, slid it into his pocket, and leaned against the porch rail, looking out at the gravel drive. Nothing out of place, nothing to chase. Just the sound of wind moving through the oak tree near the barn. She didn't owe him anything, and yet she'd left something behind. A breadcrumb, maybe. A quiet opening. He looked down at the umbrella in his hand, then back out at the vineyard road, now dry and sunlit, as if it hadn't ever carried the weight of a woman in a ruined dress and a silence thick enough to drown in. He didn't know what he was supposed to do next, but the part of him that had gone still a long time ago was listening again. The call came just after noon. Eli was under the hood of a busted Dodge, sweat dripping from his brow, the radio murmuring some low country ballad that barely cut through the drone of his thoughts. His phone buzzed against the workbench, screen lit with an unfamiliar number. He almost let it ring out. Almost. Eli James, he answered, wiping his hands absently on the leg of his jeans. A pause. Then a voice, polite, practiced, female, not hers. This is Violet Hill Estates. We were told you handle truck maintenance. He hesitated, already knowing. The vineyard supply truck won't turn over, one of the newer models. We've got a delivery window by the end of the week. Can you come out tomorrow? He looked at his calendar, already tight. Looked at his bank account in his head, already tighter. He thought about saying no. Thought about how things got blurry when proximity brought old feelings up too fast. Curiosity, caution, something quieter and harder to name. But rent didn't care about emotions, and trucks didn't fix themselves. I'll be there, he said, and hung up before he could think better of it. That night he stood on the porch for longer than usual, sipping cold coffee and watching the tree line where the vineyard road curved out of sight. The air was cooler now, that late summer kind of chill that slips into your sleeves without asking. He wondered if she'd be there, if she'd come out when she saw his truck again, or if she'd stay behind glass windows, hidden behind staff and silence. The last time he saw her, she hadn't said a word, just taken the umbrella like it was the only lifeline in the world. Now she'd left a note. Now he was going back. The next morning, he loaded his tools in quiet, told Addie he had a job across town. It wasn't a lie exactly, just a softer version of truth. By the time his truck rolled past the familiar split-rail fence and onto the gravel road of Violet Hill, the sky was wide and empty. No storm this time. But something else was coming. He felt it, deep and sure, like a gear just starting to turn. The gravel crunched under his tires as Eli pulled into the lot beside the barn. It was quiet, too quiet for a place that size. No music, no workers, no signs of the usual bustle you'd expect from a vineyard midweek. Just stillness, punctuated by the hum of late cicadas and the occasional creak of the wind shifting through the vines. He parked, killed the engine, and sat for a moment longer than necessary. His hand rested on the gear shift like he might change his mind, like reverse was still an option. But the truck was already here, and so was he. And turning back now wouldn't change what waited up that hill. He stepped out, toolbox in hand, and crossed the courtyard. The truck that needed fixing was parked near the loading dock, a newer model like they said. Clean lines, good tires, decent frame, nothing like the rust-bitten machines he usually patched up in town. He popped the hood and started inspecting, letting the work keep his hands steady while his mind threatened to wander. Then he heard the door. The soft click of it, followed by footsteps on stone. Slow, careful, not hesitant, just aware. She stepped out of the main house like the storm had never touched her. Dry hair, pulled back in a soft twist. A clean dress, something simple in navy, the kind that looked like it was chosen deliberately to appear effortless. But it was her eyes that hit hardest. Same quiet sadness, same sharpness beneath it, like glass smoothed over by water, but never dull. He stood straighter as she approached. Neither of them spoke at first, just the sound of wind threading through the vines and the metal of his wrench clinking against the edge of the engine. She looked at the truck, then at him. "Didn't think you'd come," she said softly. "You needed a mechanic." She nodded once, then paused. "You left your umbrella?" "No," he said, meeting her eyes. "I gave it to someone who needed it more." A flicker passed through her expression. Pain, maybe, or gratitude. It was hard to tell. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask why. Some moments don't need translation. They just need time. The engine gave a reluctant cough, then nothing. Eli leaned in again, flashlight between his teeth, fingers working their way down to the starter relay. It wasn't fried, not yet, but close. Hairline crack along the housing, enough to make the whole system stutter when it needed to fire. He muttered a curse under his breath and straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag as rain began to dot the windshield in slow, fat drops. She had been standing by the barn doors, arms crossed, watching, not hovering, just present. Like she was trying not to intrude, but couldn't quite make herself disappear. "Bad news?" she asked, stepping closer. "Not the worst," he said, glancing up at the darkening sky. "But I'll need a new relay. Closest shop that carries one's in Parkwood, and they won't have it in stock until tomorrow." A gust of wind swept down the hill, bringing the rain with it in earnest. It came fast, sheets of it, like the sky had been holding back and finally gave in. Eli slammed the hood shut and ducked under the awning. She was already at the door to the main house, keys in hand. "Come inside," she said, voice raised over the sudden roar. "I've got coffee." He hesitated. The last time he'd stepped under that roof, she'd been a stranger in a wedding dress, half broken and soaked through. Now she was dry, composed, and offering warmth. It felt like stepping into someone else's unfinished story. But rain didn't ask for comfort. It demanded shelter. He followed her in. The inside of the house smelled like cedar and citrus. Soft light spilled from sconces along the hallway. She led him to the kitchen, open, elegant, too clean to feel lived in. She poured 2 cups, slid one across the counter to him, without asking how he took it. "Looks like the vineyard keeps catching you in the rain," she said, smiling without looking at him. "Maybe it's not the vineyard," he replied. She met his eyes then, and something passed between them. Quiet, charged, unresolved. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Outside, the storm made itself at home. Inside, so did the silence. The storm lasted longer than either of them expected. Thunder rolled low across the hills like it was circling back just to be sure. She lit the fire in the sitting room, wood already stacked, matches kept in a small ceramic dish on the mantel. The flames caught quickly, casting flickers of gold across the hardwood floor and the soft fabric of the chairs. He sat across from her, cradling his coffee, damp jeans, stiff against the warmth. She'd brought out a thick sweater and pulled it over her dress, sleeves too long, cuffs gathered at her wrists. It made her look younger, or maybe just less like the woman he'd first seen in lace and ruin. Neither spoke for a while. The fire did enough talking, pops and crackles breaking up the hush. "You have a daughter," she said finally, not a question, just an observation. He nodded. "Addie, she's 9, stubborn, kind, thinks glitter belongs on everything." A small smile touched her lips. "That sounds exhausting." "Only when she's awake." Her laugh was quiet, real. She sipped her coffee, legs curled beneath her in the chair like she'd lived there 100 nights, though he doubted she'd let herself settle anywhere long enough to leave a mark. She didn't ask if he was married, didn't ask about the mother. Just let the silence expand around them like a shared agreement. No digging, no assumptions. Just what was offered. "She always been just you and her?" she asked. "Mostly," he said, voice low. "Her mom left when Addie was 2, didn't want the small-town life. I guess I didn't either, not really, but here I am." "Sometimes leaving feels like survival," she murmured, then caught herself. Her fingers tightened on the mug. "Sorry, that was—" "You don't have to explain." She looked over at him then, her eyes soft but guarded, like she was used to people pressing her for the whole story. He didn't ask, didn't need it. They sat like that for a long time, strangers with stories neither of them said out loud, bound by a fire, a storm, and the understanding that not every beginning starts with an answer. The rain passed sometime after dusk, leaving behind a hush so complete it felt almost sacred. The air still carried the weight of it, damp earth, wet stone, the sweet, sharp scent of crushed grape leaves. Eli glanced at his watch out of habit, but the numbers didn't register. Time had stretched out inside the house, soft and slow like the firelight, and he hadn't noticed the hours slipping by. She offered to walk him out. Said the gravel would still be slick, better to go slow. But instead of heading straight to his truck, she turned off the main path and into the rows. He followed without question. The vineyard was quiet now, only the occasional drip of water falling from leaves. The rows stretched out in every direction, green and wild, some lines perfect, others clearly new, freshly cut, still learning how to grow. She ran her hand along one of the posts as they walked, her fingers brushing the wire like she was reading something written only she could see. "This part was dead," she said, nodding toward a plot of younger vines. "Rot in the roots. Took half the south field. I had to tear everything out, let the soil rest. Start over." He glanced at the dark soil, damp and clean. "Looks healthy now." "It is." Her voice was softer here, different than in the house. "Took time, more than I wanted to give, but some things are worth saving." He didn't reply right away. The night was still, and the way she said it. It wasn't just about the vineyard. They walked farther, her arm brushing his once, unintentionally. He didn't move away. Neither did she. "I bought this place thinking I could make something perfect," she said, "something untouched. But it's not that kind of land. It's too honest for illusions. You have to earn it." He looked at her then, the dim moonlight catching the curve of her jaw, the exhaustion in her eyes, the quiet steadiness beneath it. "Maybe it's better that way," he said. "Things that grow after they've been broken, they tend to hold on longer." She smiled at that, small and real, and in the dark, between the rows, it felt like something just beginning to take root. By the end of the week, the stares had started. At the cafe, at the hardware store, even outside the school when he dropped Addie off. They didn't ask anything directly, not yet, but the town had a way of speaking without words. Lingering glances, half-smiles that didn't reach the eyes, conversations that paused just a little too long when he walked in. "She fixing up the whole vineyard? Or just the parts you're in?" Luann asked, as she poured his coffee, voice casual, but sharp at the edges. Eli didn't answer, just nodded his thanks and moved to the back booth, where he could see the door and keep his thoughts to himself. But it didn't stop the low murmurs, the quick flick of heads when he stood to leave. People noticed patterns here, a man showing up more than once at the edge of something new. That was a pattern. They didn't know her, not really. To them, she was the woman in the dress, who got left, or who left first, depending on who was telling it. They hadn't seen her hands stained with soil, sleeves rolled to her elbows, voice steady as she explained how to graft a young vine. They hadn't walked beside her through rows of struggling roots or heard the way her silence could hold more weight than anyone else's words. But he had. Every day he spent at the estate, fixing the truck, reworking the old irrigation line, checking over the generator, he saw a little more. The careful way she moved through the space, always noticing the smallest things, a vine drooping, a loose board, a cracked glass. The vineyard wasn't just a project to her, it was something she was trying to save, and in doing so, maybe save herself. She still didn't talk about the wedding, or the man, or what had driven her to pour herself into these fields like they were the only place left on earth that might hold her up. But in quiet corners of work and shared coffee and long, unspoken pauses, she was becoming familiar. And in a town that never forgot who you used to be, that kind of familiarity was a risk all on its own. He hadn't meant to say yes. She'd asked in that offhand way of hers, like it didn't matter, like it wouldn't change a thing either way. If you're still around near 6, I'm making dinner, nothing fancy. You and Addie should stay. He opened his mouth to decline, the polite kind of no you give when you know something's starting to blur. But then Addie, sitting in the passenger seat with grease on her cheek and a bottle of soda in her lap, perked up like she'd just won something. "Can we, Dad? Please?" He didn't stand a chance. Now he stood awkwardly in the wide, sun-washed kitchen, watching Addie laugh at something about pasta sauce and garden herbs, while she sat on the counter swinging her legs like it was already her second home. The woman at the stove, Violet, though she hadn't offered the name directly, only through a monogram stitched into a worn apron, moved with easy confidence. Not performance, not charm, just comfort. The kind that doesn't need permission. She let Addie help stir the sauce, her voice patient and warm, catching the spill before it happened, praising her for remembering to turn the spoon gently. It was a kind of ease Eli hadn't seen in his daughter since before the divorce, maybe before the leaving. The table was already set when the food hit the plates, soft light from the overhead pendant, casting everything in a glow that felt like someone else's life. Addie chatted through most of dinner, cheeks pink with joy, her fork chasing noodles, her feet never still. And Violet listened like it mattered. Every word. Eli barely ate. Every time he looked at them, his daughter beaming, Violet smiling with something careful but real, he felt a pull, not romantic, not yet. Something deeper, something more dangerous. It felt like home. That was the terrifying part, because he'd built his world on what didn't last, on the leaving, the aftermath. And now, sitting at a table set for 3, watching his daughter fold into a warmth he hadn't given her alone, he felt the quiet edge of something beginning, and it scared the hell out of him. The night air had settled into something soft and hushed, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel heavier. Crickets hummed in the grass. A breeze stirred the vineyard just enough to rustle the leaves. The porch light spilled a warm halo around the steps, cutting a gentle line between the house and the dark. Addie had fallen asleep on the couch somewhere around the second story. Violet read aloud. He carried her to the truck without waking her, tucked her in with the old blanket she always kept behind the seat. When he came back up to say goodnight, she was already standing on the porch with 2 mugs of tea in her hands, one arm wrapped loosely around herself, like she wasn't sure she wanted the moment to end either. He took the mug, sat beside her on the top step. Neither of them said much, just sipped and watched the dark stretch out in front of them, like it might last forever. "She's special," Violet said quietly. "She's all I've got," he replied, just as soft. Violet nodded, eyes on the trees. "She's lucky to have someone who shows up." He looked at her then. Really looked. The kind of look you give when the weight of silence isn't enough anymore. The glow from the porch light lit one side of her face, caught in the strands of hair that had come loose. She looked tired, steady, beautiful in that way people are when they stop pretending to be anything else. He leaned in without thinking, slowly, gently, the kind of lean that leaves room for hesitation, for breath. But she stepped back, just a few inches, enough to close the space between almost and not. "Not yet," she said, her voice nearly a whisper. He froze, pulled back instantly, heart thudding louder than he wanted to admit. She wasn't rejecting him, not fully, not with the way her eyes held his. There was a softness there, laced with fear, laced with something he recognized. Not unwillingness, but preservation. He nodded once, stood up slow. "I'll get her home," he said. Violet didn't stop him, and that somehow hurt more than if she had. It started with the sound of tires on gravel, slow, deliberate, not the usual rumble of a delivery truck or the neighbor's four-wheeler cutting through on the wrong side of the fence. Eli heard it from where he was finishing a patch on the vineyard's water line, crouched behind a row of young vines, sweat trailing down the back of his neck, despite the cool breeze. When he stood and turned toward the house, he saw the car first, black, clean, city-plated, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong out here unless it was lost or making a statement. The man who stepped out looked like he was here for the latter, tall, pressed suit, polished shoes that didn't flinch on the gravel, a man who didn't sweat, a man who walked like the world was still playing catch-up. He carried no flowers, no ring, just confidence worn like armor. Eli stayed where he was, half-shadowed by the vines, watched as the man climbed the porch steps like he owned them, didn't knock, just waited by the door like he had a right to. And then she answered. Violet stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled to her elbows, dirt on her jeans, her hands still damp from whatever work she'd been doing before the interruption. Her shoulders tensed the second she saw him, but her face didn't break, didn't change. She stood there, straight and still, as if she'd rehearsed this moment 100 times and still hadn't decided how it should go. They spoke, low enough that Eli couldn't hear, but body language said what words couldn't. The man leaned in, said something with the slow insistence of someone used to being listened to. She crossed her arms, said something back, sharper, firmer. Then, for a long moment, she didn't say anything at all. She let him speak. She let him finish. And then, without ceremony or grace, she shook her head. Once. The man paused, looked past her, toward the vineyard, and for the first time his posture faltered. Violet stepped back inside and closed the door. Eli exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. Whatever that man had come for, whatever he thought was still his, he'd left empty-handed. But something in Violet's eyes as she turned away said it still cost her to shut the door. The sun was sinking low when she found him behind the barn, tightening the last bolt on a new irrigation valve. The light hit everything gold, softened the rough lines of the day, the dirt smudges on his sleeves, the weight in his shoulders. He didn't hear her approach until she was already there, arms folded, silence sitting heavy between them. He looked up, wiped his hands on a rag. "Everything all right?" She didn't answer right away, just stared past him at the rows of vines stretching into the dusk. Then she spoke. "It was 37 minutes before the ceremony," she said, voice even. "That's how close we got to forever." He stilled, straightened slowly, let her talk. "His sister was the one who told me. I think she thought I already knew, said it like a joke, like she expected me to roll my eyes and say, 'Well, that's just James.'" Her mouth twitched, but it didn't become a smile. I waited for him to deny it. He didn't. Just said he was sorry, that it was complicated, that it didn't mean anything. She drew in a breath, sharp and shaky. Turns out, it had meant something, for 2 years. Eli didn't speak. He didn't have to. "I left through the service door," she said. "No shoes, no plan, just the dress, the storm, and that damn bouquet." She looked down at her hands, knuckles white where her fingers clutched each other, like they were the only solid thing left. I bought this place a year before the engagement, quietly. It was supposed to be ours eventually. Then I realized maybe it had always been mine. I'd built a future around someone who was never really planning to stay, so now I'm rebuilding for someone who might. Her eyes flicked up to his, raw and unguarded. Even if that someone's just me. Eli stepped closer, careful not to crowd her, just enough for her to feel he wasn't going anywhere. "You didn't run," he said softly. "You chose yourself." She blinked hard, but didn't look away. And in that moment, the vineyard behind them didn't feel like a broken plan anymore. It felt like a beginning. The message came through as a text the next morning. Simple, short. "Won't be able to finish the repairs. Something's come up. Thanks for everything." She read it twice before setting the phone down on the windowsill beside her coffee, barely touched. Outside, the sun had finally broken through a week's worth of clouds, casting long strips of light across the vines. The rose looked almost golden, but none of it reached her. Eli was gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just absence, neat and quiet, like he was trying not to leave a mark. She walked through the house slower than usual that morning, not because there was less to do, but because every room felt off balance now, like the gravity had shifted. The breakfast dishes still sat in the sink from when Addie had helped set the table 2 nights ago. There was a wrench on the counter he'd left behind, like it didn't matter if he got it back. She could have called, could have asked why, but she already knew. Somewhere in town, he was probably standing behind a workbench or filling a gas tank, telling himself this was the right choice. That getting close to her was always going to end like this. That the less his daughter missed her, the better. But what he didn't see, what she couldn't make him see, was that she wasn't asking for forever, just something real. And he'd given her that, without even meaning to. When he left, he took more than tools and quiet conversation. He took space. He took warmth. He took the promise that maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to end the same way again. Later that day, the new mechanic came by. Young, smiling. Didn't ask questions when she handed him the clipboard and said, "You're just here to finish what someone else started." And still, as the sun dipped low behind the hills and the vineyard cast its long shadows across the soil, she caught herself watching the road, not expecting him, but hoping, just a little, that the goodbye wasn't permanent. The storm came in sharp and fast, the way summer storms in their town always did, rolling in with no real warning, darkening the sky like a curtain dropping too early. Eli stood just outside the garage, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed as thunder cracked somewhere over the ridge. The smell of wet pavement mixed with oil and old steel. Lightning painted the sky in quick silvery slashes, and for a split second he saw it, Violet Hill. High on the hill, just past the tree line, lit up like a memory. The porch lights glowed through the storm, warm against the gray. They were on, even though no guests were booked, even though the vineyard should have been sleeping. It looked like a beacon, or maybe a question. He watched it longer than he should have. The last time he stood in that kitchen, his daughter was laughing, and Violet was standing barefoot by the stove, spoon in one hand, hair tucked behind her ear. That version of the world had felt like a crack in the wall he'd built around himself, something slipping through before he could stop it. He told himself he left for Addie, that it was easier if she didn't grow attached, that Violet, for all her kindness and softness and quiet strength, wasn't part of their real life. But the truth was uglier. He left because it scared him, how easy it had become to imagine staying, how natural it felt to hear Addie call her by name, to sit at a table set for 3. Another bolt lit up the sky. He could see the silhouette of the barn from here, could almost hear the creak of the old wind chime near the porch, the one she never replaced. He wondered if she was sitting by the fire again, sipping tea from the mug she'd handed him once, silent and waiting for something that wouldn't come. The rain started to fall harder, soaking the sidewalk in seconds. Eli stayed in the doorway, didn't move, didn't run to the truck, didn't head for the hill. He just stood there, letting the storm pass, because going back meant more than showing up. It meant facing what he left behind. It was the quiet that gave her away. Addie was never silent for long, not in the mornings, not after school, not when she had something buzzing behind her eyes, which, lately, was always. Eli had made breakfast, poured the orange juice, called her name twice. The bathroom door was open. Her bed was made, too neatly. The bike was gone. His gut twisted. He scanned the driveway, heart stammering into gear. No note, no text, no neighbor to say, "She just rode by." The back gate hung open, chain swinging gently in the breeze. He knew where she'd gone before he let himself say it out loud. Violet Hill. She hadn't stopped talking about the vineyard since the first dinner, the food, the books, the way Violet braided her hair without making her feel like a little kid. She'd started drawing floor plans of guest rooms she imagined helping to design. She called the vines "our vines." It wasn't a crush, it was something deeper, a child's instinct for safety. And she'd gone straight to it, without asking. He jumped into the truck, keys fumbling in his hand. The tires kicked gravel hard as he pulled out, windshield wipers squeaking across glass that didn't yet need them. The road blurred past. Every second stretched long and thin. What if she got lost? What if the storm came back? He turned the corner onto the hill and saw the bike first, leaned neatly against the porch rail, front tire still spinning. The truck screeched to a stop. He bolted out. And there she was. Addie, sitting on the swing beneath the wide oak, shoes kicked off, hands busy braiding a crown of clover and vine. Violet beside her, kneeling in the grass, showing her how to knot the stems just right. They looked up as he approached. Addie wide-eyed, caught, but not sorry. Violet calm, though something flickered in her face when she saw him. "I just wanted to say hi," Addie said quietly. "You said we weren't going back, but I missed her." Eli stood there, soaked in fear and shame, breath short. He hadn't just left the vineyard. He'd left the one place his daughter had started to believe felt like home. Eli slowed his steps when he saw them, just past the main trellis, knee-deep in the rose. Addie's laugh rang out, high and bright, bouncing between the vines like it belonged there. She sat cross-legged in the grass, hands full of wildflowers and clover, her shoes discarded beside her. Violet was beside her, barefoot, dress hem damp with dew, weaving stems together with fingers that moved like they'd done it 1,000 times. For a moment, he didn't say a word. He just stood there, rooted to the dirt path, watching the two people who had, somehow, without him noticing, begun to thread themselves into the same story. Addie spotted him first. Her smile faltered, then steadied. She held up the half-finished crown like an offering. "We made you one, too." His voice caught for a second. "I told you not to run off." "I didn't run," she shrugged. "I biked, and I knew where I was going." He looked to Violet then, jaw tight. Not from anger, but from something else. Guilt, maybe. Regret with a sharper edge. She didn't flinch under his stare. She didn't apologize. She just met his eyes with that same quiet steadiness that had undone him before. "She's safe here," Violet said simply. There was no defensiveness in her tone, no softness either, just truth. Eli dragged a hand down his face, exhaling hard. "You should have called." "She was already here by the time I saw the bike," Violet replied, "and I wasn't about to scare her by turning her away." Addie looked between them, unsure, her fingers still knotting flowers together in nervous rhythm. Eli walked forward, knelt beside her, not speaking for a long moment. Then he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I just need to know where you are, okay?" "I didn't want to lie," Addie whispered, "but I didn't want to let her go either." He glanced at Violet again, and this time there was no distance left in the look. He nodded slowly, almost to himself. Maybe some places didn't need permission to become home. They just needed someone brave enough to return. The flower crown sat on the porch railing, wilted by the heat, forgotten. Eli stood on the gravel, arms crossed, boots planted, like he was holding himself back from saying something he knew might cut too deep. Violet stood across from him, the distance between them charged and uneven, the vineyard stretching out behind her like a stage she hadn't asked to perform on. "You can't keep doing this," he said, voice low but sharp, inviting her in like this, letting her think this is something permanent. Violet's eyes narrowed. "I didn't invite her. She came because she needed to, and she's not confused, Eli. You are." "She's 9, he said, stepping closer, the words pushing harder now. "She's looking for something solid, and I won't let her believe this is it. This place, it's not real." The silence cracked. "Not real?" she repeated, and there was steel in her voice now. "You mean not safe, or not convenient for the story you've told yourself about how everything good ends?" He flinched barely, but she saw it. "You think this is fantasy?" she continued, quieter now, more dangerous. "You think I bought this land, tore up every dead root, rebuilt from the ground up, just to play house with a mechanic and his daughter?" His jaw clenched. "I think you're chasing something, a version of your life that didn't burn down in front of an altar." Her face didn't break, but something shifted. She stepped forward, just once. "And I think you're too scared to see what's right in front of you, that something could be rebuilt, that maybe not everything has to fall apart." Eli opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came, just the tightness in his chest, the noise in his head, the heat of standing too close to something he didn't know how to want. Violet held his gaze. "You walked away once. Don't pretend it was for her. You walked because this scared you, because I scare you." He didn't deny it, couldn't. And when he finally turned to leave, the gravel crunched louder than it should have under his feet, like the earth was registering every step he'd regret. The garage smelled like warm oil and tired decisions. Eli stood hunched over the workbench, wrench in hand, though he hadn't turned a bolt in 20 minutes, just kept tightening and retightening a perfectly good clamp. Like the more pressure he put into it, the less pressure he'd feel in his chest. The screen door creaked. His sister didn't knock. She never did. Just let herself in with that quiet kind of authority that came from knowing every version of him, including the ones he didn't like to admit, still lived in his skin. "I saw her," she said, not wasting time. "Violet, at the market. She looked like someone trying not to hope." Eli didn't look up. "She'll be fine." His sister walked farther in, heels clicking against concrete. "She's not the one I'm worried about." He exhaled through his nose, jaw tight. "It's not that simple." "No," she agreed. "It's not. Life's not. But that doesn't mean you get to run from every good thing just because it's complicated." He put down the wrench finally. "She let Addie believe in something that wasn't real. That's on her." His sister crossed her arms, eyes steady. That's on you. You're the one who turned it into a fairy tale she wasn't allowed to believe in." Eli opened his mouth to argue, but the words stuck. His sister didn't wait. "You think you're protecting her by pulling away? You're not. You're just teaching her that every good thing has an exit sign." He turned toward her then, face tight with something that lived somewhere between anger and shame. "You don't know what it's like, to be left, to be the one holding the pieces while everyone else walks away." She stepped closer, softened. "I know more than you think, but I also know not everyone leaves." She pointed to the floor, to the oil-stained concrete under their boots, to the walls they grew up inside. "Some people stay. Some people plant roots, even when it's hard, even when they're scared." Her voice dropped to something gentler. "Maybe it's time you stopped bracing for goodbye and started believing in the people who choose to stay." And for the first time in a long time, Eli couldn't tell if the ache in his chest was from guilt or from hope fighting to be let back in. The email came through just after sunrise, blinking cold and final in the inbox marked urgent. Violet stared at it from her kitchen table, fingers curled around a mug she hadn't touched. The subject line was short, withdrawal of capital commitment. Her thumb hovered above the trackpad, pulse steady but low. She clicked. The letter was formal, polite, in the way legal language is always polite, stripped of heart, heavy with finality. The investor cited recent public optics and unanticipated reputational risks, a thin veil over what everyone already knew. Word had spread. The photos, the speculation. A bride in soaked lace walking barefoot through her own vineyard. Headlines didn't care about context. They cared about stories that sold. Her wedding had become one of them. She closed the laptop without finishing the email. Her chest felt too tight, like there wasn't enough air in the room. Outside, the vines shimmered with morning dew, unaware they were now orphaned again, caught in another half-finished dream. The investor had pledged nearly 40% of the final renovation phase, guest cabins, spa add-ons, the final insulation on the main lodge. It wasn't just money, it was the difference between launching and folding, and without it, she was teetering. A knock came at the back door, one of the crew, a supply delay, another cracked beam in the guest house, a reminder that everything fragile was still pretending to be strong. She nodded, made notes, smiled when she had to. And when the door closed again, she let herself sit on the floor of the pantry, knees pulled to her chest. She didn't cry, she just sat there, letting the silence say what she couldn't. Maybe the town was right. Maybe the vineyard didn't need another outsider with ambition and heartbreak, pretending she could turn soil into salvation. Maybe people like her didn't get to have both, healing and a future. She thought of Eli, of Addie's laugh, of the way roots grew slow but stubborn. Then she stood. The vineyard wasn't finished, but neither was she, not yet. The sun was setting fast, bleeding orange into the windows of the guest house as Violet folded the last of the linens into a cardboard box. Dust clung to her jeans, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, sweat at her collarbone. The room was stripped down to its bones, no art on the walls, no cushions on the bench near the window, just quiet resignation in every bare corner. The vineyard, for the first time in months, felt like it was holding its breath. No workers, no music, no hope. She paused in the middle of the room, hand on a box flap, heart steady in that way it gets when you've already made the decision, and all that's left is follow-through. Then she heard it. The crunch of tires on gravel, not fast, not urgent, just steady. Her breath caught. She didn't move at first, didn't trust it. People could show up for a lot of reasons. Unfinished business, guilt, one last look at what they were walking away from. She'd learned not to expect anything beyond the first step. But when she stepped out onto the porch, he was already halfway up the path. Boots coated in dust, a red-handled toolbox in one hand, that quiet determination in the set of his shoulders. Eli stopped a few feet from her, didn't look at the boxes stacked behind her in the doorway, didn't look at the window where the curtains had already been pulled down, just looked at her like she hadn't left at all, like she'd always been right where she needed to be. "You're late," she said, voice soft but edged. He nodded. "I had to figure out if I was showing up for the vineyard or for you." "And?" He stepped closer, setting the toolbox on the porch like it belonged there, like it was home. "For both," he said, "if you'll let me help finish what you started." She didn't cry, but something in her broke open then, the way land softens just before spring. She stepped back to let him in, and this time he didn't hesitate. By the time the first string of lights flickered on, the vineyard had already begun to hum, not with machinery or hammers or the low thrum of work, but with people, real people, talking, laughing, wandering between rows of vines that had once been bare, uncertain, and are now rich with green, ripe with promise. Golden bulbs looped from post to post, casting everything in a soft, forgiving glow. It made the wood of the barn look warmer, the tables more inviting, the stone walkways like something pulled from memory. The air smelled like rosemary and citrus. And somewhere near the outdoor oven, someone was tearing fresh bread with their hands, offering it like communion. Violet stood near the entry archway, hair tucked loosely at her neck, a deep green dress brushing the tops of her sandals. Not glamorous, not polished, just right. Like the land had finally settled around her instead of trying to spit her out. She watched guests with a quiet smile, her hands clasped in front of her to still the tremble she couldn't quite shake. Then came the sound that broke her wide open, laughter, high and wild, cutting across the field like a bird in flight. Addie, barefoot, racing through the tall grass in a dress she'd insisted on picking herself. Her crown of woven vines had already slipped sideways, one braid unraveling, cheeks flushed. She ran past a group of artists sketching by the rose trellis, past a couple dancing slowly near the speakers where the soft pulse of live jazz threaded through the night. Eli stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, his boots still dusty despite the effort. His eyes followed his daughter, but when Violet stepped toward him, his gaze found her and stayed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because this, everything around them, was the answer. The vineyard wasn't perfect. There were still repairs to make, corners that didn't quite match. But it was alive, full, open. The town had shown up, so had strangers. No one asked about the dress, or the wedding that never happened. They asked about workshops, about wine pairings, about the land. And for the first time, Violet didn't feel like she was borrowing space. She felt like she belonged. The sky threatened in shades of gray again, soft at first, the kind of color that made people glance upward and wonder if they'd remembered to bring in the laundry or close the windows. The kind of sky that had once cracked open over a woman in a ruined wedding dress, standing alone with a bouquet that bled into the gravel. Now, under that same oak tree, she stood in a green coat, hands tucked into her pockets, eyes lifted toward the clouds like she was daring them to break. Eli walked the hill slowly, boots pressing deep into the damp soil. In one hand, he held a simple black umbrella. No dents, no broken spokes, the kind meant to last. She heard him before she saw him, but she didn't turn, just kept her gaze on the sky like it might answer a question she hadn't asked aloud. "I figured I'd come prepared this time," he said, stopping beside her. She glanced at him, the corner of her mouth curving slightly. "Looks like you're learning." He didn't smile back, not yet, just lifted the umbrella slowly, opening it with a soft click above their heads as the first drops began to fall. He held it out to her, arm extended, same as he had once before, same place, same storm. But everything else had changed. She didn't take it this time. She stepped into the space beneath it. Their shoulders brushed, neither moved. "You could have stayed dry," she murmured. "I didn't come for dry," he said. "I came for here." A pause, the sound of rain beginning to tap against the fabric above them. "I was scared," he added quietly, "not of you, of how much I wanted what this was turning into." She looked at him then, really looked, eyes softer now, but just as steady. "So was I," she said, "still am." They stood beneath the umbrella as the rain picked up, not speaking, not needing to. Because this time, she wasn't alone in the storm. And this time, he didn't walk away when the sky opened. The fig sapling was barely 3 feet tall, just a few bright leaves, thin branches like outstretched fingers, delicate and unsure. Violet had picked it from a nursery 2 towns over, the kind of place where the owner still used paper receipts and knew the history of every root ball in the yard. She hadn't planned on planting anything that week, but when she saw it, she couldn't look away. Now, near the edge of the vineyard, where the vines gave way to the sloping hill and the view reached all the way to the river, the two of them stood in the fresh-dug earth. The sun had started its slow descent, brushing gold over everything it touched. The soil was dark, fragrant, soft beneath their boots. Addie had wandered off somewhere with a sketch pad giving them space. Maybe she understood better than either of them. Eli held the sapling in place while Violet knelt beside the hole, adjusting the roots with care. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd failed before, who knew the difference between planting and burying. "You ever done this before?" he asked quietly. She smirked. "Planted things? All the time?" "I meant this kind of thing." She paused, then looked up at him. "No." He waited, steady and still. She gently placed her hand over his, guiding his palm to the soil, pressing his fingers into the earth like a seal. "Then let's see what grows," she whispered. Her voice wasn't hopeful in the cinematic sense. It was quieter than that, realer, like someone who had seen things fall apart and still found the strength to stay. They finished the planting in silence, packed the soil down, added water from a rusted tin pail. The sapling swayed slightly in the breeze, not yet strong enough to hold its shape, but rooted now, claimed. Eli brushed the dirt from his hands, watched her as she stood beside him. "You think it'll take?" he asked. She didn't look away from the tree. "I think it already has." And somehow, without ceremony, without vows or promises, that was enough. Because some things don't need declaring to be real. Some things just need time and good soil.